Welcome to Dunston House and Lord of the Manor of Thatcham. I'm your host, Nick Young. In this talk, we're going to look at the history of the manor, or rather manors of Thatcham. We're going to discuss the lord or lords of the manor, and then we'll get on to the house, Dunston House, Thatcham's manor house. So for those who don't know, where is Thatcham? Thatcham is located in Berkshire within the Kennet Valley, roughly midway between London and Bristol on the A4. Here you can see the old parish boundary shown in red from around 1700. The present parish boundary is shown in blue. Do note these are parish boundaries. We'll get onto the manors themselves in a little bit. So, starting back in Saxon times around 951, we have our first known lord of the manor. We've got King Edred, who is lord of the manor at the time, grants the manor of Thatcham to the Nuns' Minster at Winchester. At some point between 951 and 971, the lord of the manor is Alfea, a Saxon earl. Alfea leaves the manor to the crown, King Edgar. Now none of these were resident lords of the manor. This is the earliest records we have. The manor stayed in the hands of the crown until the 12th century, when Henry I granted Thatcham to his new founded abbey, Reading Abbey. And on the screen you can see one of the charters associated with that. People from the abbey, representatives, lived at Hennick, a parcel of land just west of the modern town centre. There was land enough here to farm, and indeed there were, called Abbott's Grove and Abbott's Graft, maintaining that connection with Reading Abbey. So Reading Abbey were lords of the manor. So let's go back to our map. We have the parish boundary shown on the map, but let's break this down. Within that parish are separate manors. And we have at Doomsday the manors of Thatcham, Midgham, Crookham and Greenham. And it should be noted Midgham had more than one manor contained within it. At some point in the 12th or 13th century, the manor of Colthrop appears. It may be earlier, but this is the first reference we actually have to it. So let's focus in on the manor of Thatcham. So this seems nice and simple. We have a big parish separated into manors. So we have the parish of Thatcham, and then within it we've got these 5 different manors, one being called the manor of Thatcham. So let's zoom in. We get to around 1300 and we get a borough created for Thatcham called the Manor of the Borough of Thatcham. And this is essentially the town centre as it was then. Now to distinguish the two manors, they were named as this. The Manor of Thatcham, alias Hennick, which was the major area, the big area, the area in pink, with the exception of the borough. And the borough was called the Manor of the Borough of Thatcham. Each would have had their own lord of the manor, but it just so happens that both manors remained attached to Reading Abbey, so the lord of the manor in both cases was the same. So in 1537 we get the dissolution of Reading Abbey. The ownership of the manors reverts back to the crown. Shortly after, in 1540, we get John Winchcombe II purchases the manors along with the manor of Bucklebury. Now it's this John Winchcombe that is known as Jack of Newbury, but that's a whole nother story. So when the Winchcombes purchased the manors, we've got the Manor of Thatcham, alias Hennick, and we also have the Manor of the Borough of Thatcham. When they eventually sell it, there is a creation of Hennick Manor. That creates a whole nother issue, and is a story for another time. Now Winchcombe lived up at Bucklebury, his estate up there, where it was passed down from generation to generation. After being in the hands of the Winchcombe family for upwards of 170 years, the manor fell to Viscount Bolingbroke, husband of Francis Winchcombe. He was attainted for high treason leading to the seizure of his estates. Thatcham Manor was then sold by the Crown in 1722 by a private act of Parliament. The purchaser was the Duke of Chandos, and in the same year he sold it to Brigadier General Richard Waring. And he started his military career in 1690 with the Earl of Danby's Volunteer Regiment. In 1691 he became the youngest captain of the Grenadier Troop, and his advancements brought him right up to becoming Brigadier General in the early 18th century. He retired from military service around 1717. Shortly after purchasing the manors, Waring commissioned the construction of a house and a park on a section of the manor called Dunston. The construction timeline is uncertain, but it's likely completed by 1725. Shown on the screen is a section of the Willis map of 1768, but it also appears on the 1761 Roke map. Roke, during his survey, noted this about it: one of the most magnificent mansions in the country. The house was constructed using glazed brick with stone accents at the corners and arched windows, but more on the house shortly. A park was meticulously designed around the house, as outlined on the map. Part of the landscape was made in a pattern resembling a troop formation from one of the battles that General Waring was involved with. Switching back to a modern map, the area of the park enclosed is shown. The house is shown in red and the driveways in black. The modern allotments near this site have a track running down the centre, and this is part of the trackway that led from the Great Western Road, the A4, up to the house itself. The distance from the A4 up to the house is just over half a mile. The alternative going from the west, what is called Park Avenue, is just under half a mile. There is, as far as I'm aware, only one known drawing of the house itself. The drawing is believed to date to around 1790 and is now shown on the screen. We know from documents that there's at least 3 floors to the main building itself. There's a state bedchamber along with a dressing room. The drawing room itself measuring 36 foot by 25 foot. There's a dining parlour of similar dimensions along with a library and breakfast parlour. On the second story, there are 9 bedchambers with dressing rooms and other rooms to go along with them. And on the upper story, there are at least 6 servants' rooms. There's kitchens, larders, pantries, a cook's room. There are cellars. In addition, there's a wash house, a bakehouse, a brew house, a peat house, lodging rooms. On another side, there's a coach house for 6 carriages and stabling for 23 horses. There's a granary, there's a coach yard, there's a dove house. There's what's described as a landscaped park, a pleasure garden, kitchen garden. There's fish ponds and much more. So General Waring had this built and he becomes Lord of the Manor of Thatcham, and he's resident at the house. And it's believed this is the first resident Lord of the Manor since Saxon times. Richard dies in 1737 and is buried in the local parish church. The estate, the Lord of the Manor, passes to his son, William Bore Waring. William dies just 9 years later in 1746. The estate and the title Lord of the Manor passing to his sister, Frances. The title and the estate then pass to her son, Sir Archer Croft, and it stays with him until 1792. So in the hands of Archer Croft, by 1774, at the latest, it was being leased out to others. And by 1792, the Crofts had started to sell off the assets of the estate. And later in 1792, Archer Croft dies, the estate passing to his brother John. Now it gets a little complicated because when John dies, it passes down for another branch to Sir Herbert Croft. And there are more family members involved, but let's keep it simple at this point. Essentially, they have no use of the estate. So the property is put up for auction a number of times between 1797 and 1800. Some parts were sold off. Majority of it were purchased by the auctioneer, or one of the auctioneers, who then sold the building off piece by piece. So, for example, a Mr. Wyatt, the agent of Lord Carrington, bought much of the oak flooring. Mr. Tull of Crookham bought some of the bricks and the tiles the building was made of. And around 1802, William Mount purchased the Manor of Thatcham. So the estate and the house is now gone. The manor, the lordship, has now passed on to another family. So what can be seen today? Much of the materials, as we've already said, were purchased and used elsewhere. And if you go down Church Lane in Thatcham, you will come to United Reformed Church. This was built using materials from the manor house itself. The site of the house today is covered by a housing estate. So to summarise, we've got a Lord of the Manor in Saxon times. We've seen it change hands a number of times until we get to General Richard Waring in 1722, where he builds himself a manor house called Dunston House. It lasts less than 100 years, is demolished and the materials reused. But he became, as far as we're aware, the first resident lord of the manor since the Saxon period. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. I hope you enjoy the rest of this fantastic event. Thank you.